Today we're going to look at foreign policy during the imperialist era. We're going to look at four policies that span from President McKinley to President Woodrow Wilson. The first one is the open door policy. This one is originated around 1899, and it starts with McKinley, but of course McKinley will be assassinated and Theodore Roosevelt takes over for him in 1901. So he's going to continue this open door policy. The open door policy deals primarily with China, but the entire region is something that we want opened to our trade, okay, but primarily dealing with China. So we want to trade with China. The problem is that over the years, China has weakened to the point to where European nations particularly have been able to come in and carve out areas of influence, and those are called spheres of influence. And they would control one geographic area, and it could be a small area or a large area depending on who it was. And within that area, within that sphere of influence, they had, nobody else traded in it. So in a British sphere, all trade would have been done with Britain only. And you wouldn't have really seen other countries coming in there and invading in that sphere. The thing is, though, that the United States wants to trade with China, and we don't have a sphere of influence. And to be honest, we don't really want a sphere of influence. The United States doesn't want a small part. They want China, not to have and not to only trade, kick everybody else out, but they want the freedom to trade within China. So John Hay is going to write the open door notes, and that's going to form the basis of the open door policy. And so basically this would leave China open for U.S. trade and commerce throughout all of China. Now, it's important to understand that during the imperialist era, though some will say, and we'll make this comment for humanitarian reasons, that we do things to make things better for people, but understand that if it is not to our benefit, we don't really care. And understand that we're not there to help China. We are there to further our goals, okay? The Chinese, depending on who you talk to, you have some Chinese who are going to work with the Europeans and with the U.S. and let's just say Westerners to keep that easier. And they're going to become wealthy with it, and they're going to act very westernized. They're going to dress Western in a westernized manner, suits, dresses, things like that. But you also have a contingent of the society, of Chinese society, that do not like it, and those are your nationalists. And the nationalists are going to form a secret society, and they're going to be known as the Boxers. And their ultimate goal was to end Western influence in China. And again, influence is, all who are living by the Western standards, okay? So what they're going to do is massacre 300 foreigners and Chinese Christians, and thus beginning the Boxer Rebellion. Why they're killing Chinese? If they're just looking at Westerners or Western influence, why kill the Chinese Christians? Because the Christianity was seen as a Western religion. It is technically an Eastern religion, but it is practiced mainly in the West. So it is considered by many, especially in China, to be a Western influence. So they're going to kill foreigners, but at the same time the Christians. And as this kind of keeps getting bigger and bigger, the whole rebellion itself, they're also going to kill other Chinese who have adopted Western lifestyles. To put down the rebellion, there's going to be a multinational force that comes together, U.S., French, British, and they're going to put down this rebellion. And it was fairly violent, the actual putting down of the rebellion. You can see in this picture some of the fighting going on, and some of the different national flags. You've got the British flag there, but you can also see too that it They beheaded the Boxers, as they called them, by the way. Germans are there. And this is an actual picture of the beheadings. So it's a fairly violent rebellion. Of course, anytime you massacre that many people, it's going to be. At the same time, around about the same time, late 19th century, late 1800s, Japan is going to begin asserting its influence. It's growing, industrializing also. And they're going to kind of begin to want to expand. They're going through some imperialism, getting up to that point also. And so they're going to launch wars against both China and Russia. Now, do we care about China and Russia? Well, maybe not Russia, but definitely China, because we're trying to trade in China. And also consider, too, that we have the Philippines, which is in this Southeast Asia area. And so a surging Japan is threatening to that interest. So Roosevelt feels like our interests in the Pacific are being threatened, and so he's going to send the U.S. Navy around the world. Now, he's going to send this fleet, and its name was the Great White Fleet, to sail around the world. Now, this Great White Fleet is just that. The ships had been painted white. It was meant to be intimidating. I don't know of too many people today who will say, ooh, white ships, I'm scared. But from what I've read, white in the Japanese culture signified death. So to them, it would have been significant. And his goal was to show the Japanese the strength of the U.S. Navy, and also to discourage them from moving against China or the Philippines. And for the most part, he was pretty successful. And here you can see, this is the USS Missouri. And you can see it's been painted white. You can kind of look at the ship behind it and see the same thing. Also notice that this is a more modern ship. You got the steam. Right here you can see the steam. They've got steam engines on this making it run, but it's made out of steel. And this is an actual photograph of it. So it's not just a couple of pictures. It's a couple of ships. It's a lot. Just another picture. And this is a great political cartoon. You've got Roosevelt standing there, and he's all excited. But so is George Washington. You'll notice February 22nd, it's his birthday. And also Uncle Sam representing the United States. Okay, so, and it looks like this, that they're coming home. So they're welcoming the ships back. The next policy is all about Roosevelt. This is Roosevelt's policy. Now, the next three we're going to look at, the Roosevelt Corollary, the dollar diplomacy, and the moral diplomacy, are all dealing with particularly Latin America. And so just make sure you understand that Open Door dealt with Asia. And the Roosevelt Corollary, dollar diplomacy, and moral diplomacy are dealing with Latin America. And all three of these things, they're kind of going to be built on each other, but they're built at the very bottom of this. The base of all of them is the Monroe Doctrine. And that's what corollary means, by the way. It's an expansion and adding to. So this is Roosevelt's addition to the Monroe Doctrine. Now, the Monroe Doctrine had been written in 1823. And remember that we had talked about this, and it said that Monroe said the U.S. would not allow European powers to colonize newly independent nations in the Western Hemisphere, and he was specifically talking Latin America, nor would we interfere with the European powers. So Roosevelt's modification here is that the United States has the right to intervene in the region if they have trouble paying their debts. Now, that also can kind of go back to what we had added to Cuba's Constitution. We talked about that yesterday. But if we're looking at a country that can't pay their debts, to say Germany or to say France, what's France or Germany going to do to get that money back? Well, they're going to send their army, and they're going to in some way take over that country. And we don't want that. We don't want a European nation's armed forces this close to us, and really we feel like we can handle it. So if South American, Latin American countries have a hard time paying their debts, then we can intervene, because like I said, we don't want them, those imperialist nations, we are, but we don't want European imperialist nations to use debt collections as a way of occupying the Caribbean or Latin America. Now, do we use this? Yes, quite a bit. We're going to intervene in several Central American countries. We're going to take over customs houses. We're going to collect taxes to pay their trade debts. And really, we're going to use that as a way of keeping the European powers from using their military to collect those debts. Do you think that Latin America is happy that somebody is there to take care of them? And the answer, of course, is no. It is going to create resentment. As you can imagine it is. Think of your parents just coming, okay, you can't handle your bills very well, so I'm going to take charge of your check, your income, and I'm going to pay your bills for you, and I will give you a little bit left to live on. You would be resentful, and really so were they. Oops, sorry. And here you can see some of the political cartoons. Again, notice this is the big stick diplomacy. That's its nickname. And here is where you begin to see Roosevelt and these political cartoons carrying a big stick. And it usually says big stick of some way. But look again, too, at where we are. This is the Caribbean Sea. And these are the Caribbean nations. You've got Venezuela, Panama, Mexico, Cuba, Santo Domingo, and he's almost like a young boy, and he is pulling a string of ships, and so this would represent, of course, our Navy. But look, debt collector. Right here it says the sheriff, and you come all the way around here, and it looks like it says the receiver. But again, you get this idea that we're patrolling the Caribbean. Here's another way of looking at it. This is the line drawn in the sand. And again, that helmet, that pointy helmet, typically is, well, not typically, it is Germany. And this is going to be another European nation, possibly Britain. But the Monroe Doctrine is that line in the sand, and we are telling Europe, you may not step across this. Here you have, again, Teddy Roosevelt. He's dressed as a cop here. He was known as our constable, but you can see him here as the policeman of the world. So he represents the United States as the policeman of the world. He, again, is carrying a big stick. Now, this isn't a club or a bat, but this is a police baton, and it's called the New Diplomacy. So we're willing to use force with this new diplomacy. But look, he's holding a rolled up paper for arbitration. He had helped end the Russo-Japanese War. But you can look at the different peoples that he's in the U.S., but he's straddling the world. You've got Mexico, you've got the Middle East, you've got Asia back here, you've got Europe over in here, and you go back, you got some Chinese over here too, the French. So you got a lot going on. Russia's right here, if you look carefully. So again, we are bigger than they are, if that says anything. The next president was Taft. Now, we didn't really talk about Taft with the progressive movement. I told you that he really wasn't as big of a progressive as Roosevelt was, and really disappointed Roosevelt. And I think he probably disappointed Roosevelt with his diplomacy. Taft felt like that the big stick was harsh. And instead of going in there and making enemies, or at least creating resentments, let's go in there and let's invest. And so his idea was to substitute money for bullets. So instead of using force, we're going to invest in these countries. And that's all well and good. I mean, his administration is going to encourage U.S. bankers and businesses to invest in Latin America and the Caribbean. And it's going to come with the promise. The government promises that if problems come up, they will intervene on your behalf. So it almost sounds like a can't lose kind of thing. The problem is that sometimes businesses, bankers face some pretty big losses. And again, even though it was meant to solve some of the issues that existed. It really ended up creating new ones. And you did see Taft having to send the military into, I believe it was Haiti, when the resentment actually led to a rebellion. And so it was not as peaceful, I guess you could say, as he really wanted it to be. The final diplomacy is moral diplomacy, and this was Woodrow Wilson's. Wilson was, of these three presidents, he was the Democrat. The other two were Republicans. He's the Democrat. Understand that Wilson was not an imperialist. He did not really support imperialism. And so I don't think he's really big on board with either the Roosevelt corollary or really even dollar diplomacy, though he's not going to totally pull back on that, and he will use it. Wilson comes from a long line of ministers, and so he's got this idea of right versus wrong. Okay, and he believes it's the role of the U.S. to promote democracy and moral progress in the world. And his big goal here was to teach the Mexicans to elect good men, which we can go into a whole lesson on just that one phrase, and all of the racist connotations involved in that. And really, there was a lot of instability in Mexican politics. You had a lot of turnover, and the last president had actually been assassinated. And so he refuses to even recognize the New Mexican government. And he doesn't really like the way they vote, who they choose. And so, you know, like I said, there's a lot going on just within that. But he also supports the economic interests of American businessmen in the Western Hemisphere. And that's kind of pulling in some of that dollar diplomacy. His administration was, even though he's not a fan of a lot of this stuff, it was not devoid of conflict in Latin America. In 1915, he involved himself in Haiti. I said Haiti with Taft, and it wasn't Haiti, and I'll come back to that later. But Wilson is going to send Marines in to protect the property and banking interests. But again, very much using dollar diplomacy for that. He also is going to get involved in Mexico, and he's going to send the army into Mexico looking for a Mexican bandit that attacks over the border at Pancho Villa. And he's not going to be successful in that because of the outbreak of World War I. During this time, too, remember we talked about Mahan stated that we need a canal across the Isthmus of Panama. And that's going to be harder to ensure than maybe it should be. Panama, when all of this began, was not an independent country. It was Colombia. And the Panamanians were a part of Colombia, but the government itself, the country itself, was Colombia. And they refused to sell us the land. The French were not able to build it, the canal, as they had been attempting to do. And they were trying to sell the rights of that to the United States, and Colombia said no. So the United States is going to instigate a rebellion. Apparently, they're going to talk the Panamanians into wanting independence. And so I don't know, the pictures do the best thing. We're going to attempt, and we're going to tell them, yeah, we'll help you become independent. And Roosevelt, of course, is big in this. And we have a ship kind of, you know, out to sea, you know, visible. And so as the Colombians are ready to fight the Panamanians, we just pretty much let them know, do you really want to do that? And in the end, they decide no. And they're going to give the Panamanians their independence. And the Panamanians, in return, are going to allow us to lease the land that we need for the canal. Now, I'll be honest, we leased this land. It was like $10,000 a year through like 1999. I'm telling you, it was a very lopsided deal in favor of the United States. And as you can imagine, over the years, Panama is going to become very resentful of the United States in all of that. So we were looking out for our best interests. That's the best way I can think to tell you. This is I think a great one. You got Panama down here, but look, the Roosevelt Doctrine. He's getting off and he's loaded for bear there. He's got guns, swords, knives, bayonets, and a shovel to dig it. But look too, this is the USS GOP. That's the Republican. You can see the Republican elephant right there at the front of the ship, and we're gonna get it. We're gonna do what we have to do to get it. I always like this one too, Panama or bust. Now, what is keeping us from getting the canal? Look at things that are in the way of the wagon. International law, treaties, you know, Colombian protests, precedent. All those things are there to get in our way. And we have the Panamanian people here beside us, but again, small next to Roosevelt and almost seen as a child. But look, again, the Republicans are driving this. Again, you can see him. He's on, it looks like a little canoe, but he's really sitting on a ship, and he's got that big stick. Again, going to Panama. There he's digging. Roosevelt's digging the canal through the mountains. And this is the last slide. But again, look, you can see the excavator here. It's called Roosevelt, but look at the features to it. It looks like he's got a mustache and the glasses. This is the Republican steam shovel, and here's the things that they're got. This is what we've got to get out of the way. This is the things that we have to get past to build that canal, and that would be Democratic opposition, railroad obstructionists, and political criticism. So the Republicans are going to just kind of blow their way through this. Okay? All right. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I will go over any specific thing you have an issue with.